Where the outside is warm.
Okay, time for Evan to do another political rant. You want to know why climate change will not be fixed as it is, at least during this generation, and why, like a lot of things, including workers' rights, union rights, the climate, the environment, the ongoing genocide in Palestine, the fact that we can't get healthcare, all of that, like the growing wealth inequality, all of this is either directly or indirectly Ronald Reagan's fault. And why is it Ronald Reagan's fault? It is because Ronald Reagan, by basically teaming up with a bunch of conservative religious leaders in the evangelical movement, activated the evangelical voter base, and which has given the Republican Party their backbone for the last 40 years. They were by and large single issue voters. Yes, some of them hated black people enough to vote for Republicans. Enough of them hated poor people to vote for Republicans. As oxymoronic as contradictory as that is for being someone who's a self-identifying Christian, hating drug addicts, things like that. Like plenty of fear mongering things, but by and large, abortion was the single issue. Till they caught the car. But we're not there yet, so we'll get there. I have 10 minutes. Buckle up, Buttercup! To understand things, like the vast majority of these things, I want to talk about the underpinnings of American evangelicalism, which is Protestantism. Protestants don't really show their faith too much. They they're very much they view hard work as virtuous. They view working hard, because you'll have a place in the kingdom of heaven, is a very Protestant thing. And that has kind of been extrapolated where suffering, the evangelical movement has extrapolated out of that Jesus suffered and it was virtuous. And therefore, if we suffer, we are virtuous. Therefore, suffering, difficulty, adversity are considered virtuous things within, the evangelical movement. Now, on top of that, evangelicals think that they are doing the will of God. They think that they are the most correct religion, and that is what all sects of Christianity do, and that is to be expected. The problem is that you pair the audacity and arrogance of Americans with the idea that they are doing God's work. Even if you put two evangelicals in the same room and asked what their goals were, and they were diametrically opposed, both of them would still think they're doing the will of God. There is also the aspect of, in America, churches are businesses, right? A lot of the time, one church will shit on another church down the street and vice versa, and pragmatically, they might have exactly the same beliefs, and that's probably why they're beefing. It's because the leadership of one church doesn't want their clergy, their congregation, to go to the other church or even interact with them, because they could just go to either one intermittently, and you as a believer are getting the same service regardless, but only one of them is able to take your money from the collection plate. Christianity, in its origin, there is an in-group and an out-group, and that is the people who hoard wealth and everybody else. People who are greedy. The Bible admonishes rich, greedy people. Jesus admonishes rich and greedy people, arguably more than any other group. And the problem is that in America, bills must be paid. Even with all the exemptions that churches get, they still got to pay for gas. They still got to pay for the light bill. They still got to pay for the, preacher's, home mortgage. They still have to do X, Y, and Z. And they have to pay salaries for the people that are on staff. And so bills must be paid. And so when you have someone who's wealthy and who does tithe 10% of their income, and 10% of their income is, a quarter, and 10% of their income is, a quarter of the yearly budget, maybe you can see the whole, like, the poor person who, maybe stole from a drugstore or something because they couldn't afford, Neosporin. You can admonish them for greed, or you could, like, someone who is addicted to drugs because somebody handed them, a crack pipe at 15, and now their life is in shambles because none of the adults in their life were able to help them. And you look at that person and you're like, oh, that person is gluttonous. They're indulging in avarice. Instead of following what the Bible tells you to, you twist it and find other people to demonize. You take a handful of passages as far as abortion is concerned and make that your entire personality. So, now that I've prefaced all that, think about why why we don't have things like universal health care. Well, the suffering you're going through will probably offset the sin that you've led in life by being, being poor in all the things you have to do to survive while being poor. So you shouldn't have health care. You should just, be sick and die, because then you'll be the suffering and virtue you have through that suffering will absolve you maybe help absolve you in the eyes of the Lord. And then you can use that logic to extrapolate for basically anything. God forbid we get into the prosperity gospel and how that's been bastardized. They don't want you to have health care. They don't want you to have social services. They don't want to fix wealth inequality and make people's lives better, because they want people to suffer, because they think that everybody is sinful and everybody deserves to suffer, because suffering is virtuous and having that comfort is sinful. They can have that comfort. They're godly. They're different. But the people halfway across the country who they've never met, who probably cut like 0.5 cent of their taxes goes to go help, they don't deserve it. Now, Evan, you mentioned Israel and Palestine and all that, in the environment and all that. Where does that come in? I'll tell you. This is the second half of things. So remember how I said earlier that Christians, don't think, people are deserving of that, and, all that? Well, about the environment. Well, the thing is that most evangelicals, I think the number was something like 86-87% of evangelicals believe that the second coming of Christ will happen in their lifetime. And what is the second coming of Christ? The rapture. What is the rapture? The end of the world is when all of the fucking good Christians get, Star Trek beamed into heaven, and everybody else is kind of fucked. Back in, I'd say in the early 20th century, a bunch of Christian, right-wing Christian theologians in America, evangelicals, kind of took a read of the Bible of, if once the Jews inherit the Holy Land, the rapture is likely to start. And then you have a huge sect of American evangelicals, enough that they are able to influence voting in Washington, genuinely believing that once Israel is able to control the whole of their land and get rid of all the Palestinians, then the rapture is liable to start. You might think, Evan, humans can't jumpstart the rapture. Well, remember what I said about American audacity? They think you can. And so what do we get? Because all of these people think that the rapture will happen in their lifetime, they're not concerned about maintaining, the environment for future generations and keeping it healthy, because they're not going to be here. It's a very boomer-esque mentality. They don't need to preserve, a better world for their children, because their children aren't going to be here that long anyways. They'll be with them in heaven after the rapture. And it's why AIPAC, the PAC that lobbies on behalf of Israel, is funded primarily by Christian Zionists here in America, not by actual Jewish people. Jewish people in America actually contribute very little compared to the vast amount of Christian lunatics that pay into this shit. So yeah, that's why Ronald Reagan, and realistically more so, the American evangelical movement, are the reason why everything sucks in America and you can't have anything nice. If you made it to the end, I appreciate you. Follow me and throw a brother a bone.